Have you ever woken up from a nightmare and couldn't tell if it was real or not? Tonight, we dive into 5 terrifying stories that blur the line between dreams and reality. It started on a quiet, rainy night. The kind of night where the wind whispers through the cracks of the window, and the shadows seem to move just a little too much. Alex had just fallen asleep after a long day of work. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, and he barely noticed the dark clouds covering the moon. But tonight, sleep felt different. Almost immediately, he was pulled into a dream that felt sharper than usual. He was standing in his own bedroom, but something was wrong. The walls were darker, the air colder, and the faint hum of the heater sounded distorted, like a deep growl. The objects in the room, the lamp, the bed, even his own reflection in the mirror, looked slightly twisted, almost mocking him. A noise came from the corner of the room. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder, deliberate. Footsteps, slow and heavy, echoing across the wooden floor. He turned slowly. There, standing in the shadow near the window, was a figure. Tall. Thin. Its face was hidden in darkness, but its presence was suffocating, unnatural. Alex froze. His heart pounded so violently that it felt like it would burst from his chest. "Who's there?" he whispered, though no sound came out of his mouth. The figure didn't move, but its eyes, or where he thought its eyes should be, glowed faintly red. The air grew colder, and a low, almost inaudible whisper started filling the room. It was unintelligible at first, like a language long forgotten, yet somehow Alex understood the meaning: "You can't escape." He tried to move. He tried to scream. His body wouldn't respond. The fear was paralyzing, crushing him from all sides. The figure glided closer, silent, effortless. Shadows stretched from it, crawling along the floor and walls, and Alex felt like the room itself was swallowing him. He wanted to wake up. He tried to open his eyes, but he couldn't. He was trapped. Suddenly, the figure raised a hand. Alex felt a cold, invisible force press against his chest. Panic surged through him, but it was too late. The world around him twisted violently. The walls bled shadow, the ceiling fell in 1,000 jagged pieces, and the floor cracked open beneath him. He screamed, a soundless scream, until finally, he jolted awake. His bedroom was normal. The moonlight filtered softly through the window. The heater hummed quietly. His heart still raced, and sweat dripped from his temples. He tried to calm himself. Just a dream, just a dream. But something felt off. Too real. Too vivid. When he looked at his reflection in the mirror across the room, he froze. For a brief moment, he thought he saw the shadow figure standing behind him. He blinked, and it was gone. Only the room remained, silent and still. But the sense of being watched lingered. He couldn't shake it. That night, Alex didn't sleep again. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the same cold presence, the same impossible fear, like the nightmare had followed him into reality. By morning, he was exhausted, haunted, and terrified to close his eyes again. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The nightmares wouldn't stop. And each one would feel more real than the last. After the first night, Alex barely slept. Every shadow in his room seemed heavier, every creak of the floorboards louder. By the second night, he was exhausted, his mind fraying from constant fear. Still, he hoped tonight would be different. He told himself firmly, it was just a nightmare. Nothing more. But as soon as he closed his eyes, he was pulled back into a world that was both familiar and impossibly wrong. This time, he wasn't in his bedroom. He was standing in the middle of a long, narrow hallway. The walls were painted in dull, peeling colors, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. But the strangest thing was the mirrors. Every few feet, a mirror reflected his own image, yet it wasn't quite right. His reflection's movements lagged behind him, its expression twisted into something cruel and mocking. He tried to step forward. The hallway seemed endless. He could hear faint whispers, almost like dozens of people speaking all at once, too soft to understand. His reflection's eyes burned red in the mirrors. And then he saw them, shadowy figures lined up along the hallway, standing motionless, watching. Their shapes were distorted, unnaturally tall and thin, faces hidden in darkness. When one of them moved, Alex felt a cold chill rush through his body. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward. Its movement was jerky, like a broken puppet, yet it glided toward him effortlessly. Alex tried to run, but the floor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of him, and every step made him feel heavier, slower. The whispers grew louder, filling his ears with a sound that was almost unbearable, like hundreds of voices screaming in unison. He reached out toward a mirror, desperate for an anchor to reality. As he touched the glass, the reflection moved violently, grabbing his wrist. Pain shot through him, sharp and searing, and Alex screamed. This time, he could hear it. But the hallway didn't respond. The figures advanced, surrounding him. Each step they took echoed in a way that made it feel like the walls themselves were breathing. Then the floor beneath him cracked. Shadows erupted from the fissures, climbing his legs, wrapping around him like cold, living chains. He struggled, thrashing, but the shadows held firm. The figures leaned closer, whispering unintelligible words that gnawed at his sanity. Alex's vision blurred. He felt himself being dragged downward, into darkness, into a void that had no end. And then, just as suddenly as it began, he woke up. He gasped, drenched in sweat, heart hammering. His bedroom was still. The morning sun streamed weakly through the curtains, but nothing about it felt comforting. His body shook violently. He glanced around, terrified, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a shadow move in the corner of his room. But when he blinked, it was gone. Alex's rational mind tried to reason. It's just a dream. It's over now. But deep down, he knew something had changed. The nightmares weren't just dreams. They were reaching out, leaving traces behind. Every night, the shadows, the figures, the cold, unbearable fear, they were getting stronger. He sat on the edge of his bed, clutching his head. Every part of him wanted to sleep, but the thought terrified him. Even closing his eyes felt like surrendering to the horrors that awaited. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a tiny part of him knew he couldn't avoid it. He had to face them. Or the nightmares would eventually consume him completely. That day, Alex went about his life, but it felt unreal. The sun seemed dim, and every sound was amplified, every shadow exaggerated. He avoided mirrors. He avoided going near corners where the light didn't reach. And as night fell again, he knew it was coming. The second nightmare was just the beginning, and whatever waited for him tonight would be far worse. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep. Waiting for the darkness to come alive. By the third night, Alex barely recognized himself. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale, and his hands constantly trembled. He hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Every time he tried, the nightmares found him, dragging him deeper into something he couldn't explain. Even the sunlight felt fake, as if reality itself were warped. That night, as he reluctantly closed his eyes, the dream began immediately. This time, he was not in a hallway or his bedroom. He was outside. But it wasn't the familiar streets near his home. He stood in a deserted town, the buildings half collapsed, windows like dark, empty eyes. The sky was a dull gray, but he could see no clouds or sun, only a heavy, oppressive darkness that pressed down on him. He tried to move, but his legs felt like lead. His head, and for a moment, he couldn't tell if they were outside or inside him. He tried to close his eyes, to wake up, but sleep refused to release him. The shadows began to merge into a single, towering figure. Its body was a shifting mass of darkness, limbs stretching impossibly long, face a mask of terror and rage. It reached for him with hands that seemed to tear at the air itself. Alex screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. Then the ground beneath him cracked open, and he fell. Down, down, into a black abyss. He couldn't see the bottom. He couldn't feel the sides. Only the figure hovered above, reaching, whispering, dragging him further into the darkness. The cold was unbearable, the silence deafening. He tried to scream, to fight, but his body was nothing but a passenger in the nightmare. Just when he thought he would be consumed, he jolted awake. He was in his bed, heart racing, sweat soaking his shirt. The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains, but the relief was fleeting. On the floor near his bed, a dark stain had appeared overnight. It wasn't blood, not exactly, but it looked like something had been dragged across the floor. Alex's stomach turned. He backed away from the stain and noticed his reflection in the mirror across the room. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement behind him, a figure looming, tall, faceless. He blinked, and it vanished. Yet the feeling lingered. Something had followed him from the nightmare into the waking world. Alex knew it wasn't just a dream anymore. The nightmares were no longer confined to his sleep. They were leaking into reality, bleeding into his world. Every shadow, every reflection, every quiet corner of the house seemed alive with them. And deep down, he realized the terrifying truth: the third nightmare wasn't the worst. Whatever came next, would be far worse. He sat on the edge of his bed, shivering. His phone lay on the nightstand, useless. No message, no call could protect him from what was coming. And as he stared at the ceiling, he heard it again, faint, almost imperceptible, a whisper from the darkness. Soon, you will belong to us. After 3 nights of terror, Alex had stopped trying to fight sleep. But the moment his head touched the pillow, he was dragged into darkness again. This time, the nightmare began before he even realized it had started. He was sitting in his living room, but something was wrong, everything was slightly off. The furniture seemed taller, the walls closer, the colors muted and sickly. He tried to stand, but his legs refused to move. The air grew thick, almost solid, and he could feel it pressing against his chest. Then he heard it, the whispers. Low, patient, growing louder with each passing second. You can't leave, you can't leave. The sound seemed to come from every direction at once. He tried to call out, but his voice was gone. The shadows appeared first along the walls, creeping like ink spreading across paper. Then they coalesced into humanoid forms, dozens of them, faceless and silent, yet somehow aware of him. One of the shadows stepped forward. Its body flickered, unstable, but its presence was undeniable. Alex felt its gaze like ice on his skin. It was waiting. Suddenly, his apartment began to shift. The ceiling stretched upward, then collapsed. The furniture twisted grotesquely, bending and snapping like it was alive. The windows showed scenes from his nightmares, hallways with endless mirrors, deserted towns with broken buildings, figures reaching out for him. Alex realized with horror that the nightmares were no longer contained to sleep, they were bleeding into reality. Desperate, he grabbed his phone, hoping that some connection to the real world would anchor him. But when he turned it on, the screen showed a live feed of his bedroom, and there, behind him in the reflection, was a tall, dark figure. Its eyes glowed red. It reached toward him slowly, deliberately. And he felt a cold presence wrap around his shoulders. He dropped the phone, the screen shattering, and the shadows reacted as if disturbed. Panic consumed him. Alex ran from the apartment, but the streets outside were wrong. The city was distorted, buildings leaning at impossible angles, streetlights flickering like dying fireflies. Every person he passed appeared hollow, shadowed versions of themselves, whispering unintelligible words as they stared at him. The city felt alive, a nightmare that stretched beyond the limits of sleep, and it was hunting him. He stumbled into a small park, hoping to find some familiarity. But the trees were black, their branches clawing at the sky. The ground beneath him trembled, and the shadows rose from the cracks in the pavement like dark. threaten his very existence. As he sat on the edge of his bed, trembling, he heard it again, the faint whisper, chilling and certain, "Soon, you will belong to us completely." Alex didn't sleep that night. He sat in his room, clutching a blanket, staring at the ceiling as if willing the darkness to stay away. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't. The nightmares were patient, relentless. They had followed him through 3 nights, grown stronger with each one, and now, the final nightmare awaited. As the clock struck midnight, a cold wind swept through his apartment, rattling the windows even though they were closed. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to lengthen, creeping toward him. The air felt thick and heavy, almost liquid, pressing against his skin. He tried to stand, to run, but his legs felt rooted to the floor. He realized, with growing horror, that he wasn't just about to dream, he was being pulled into the nightmare whether he wanted it or not. Suddenly, the room dissolved around him. The walls melted, the ceiling stretched endlessly, and he found himself standing in an empty void. Darkness extended infinitely in all directions, but the space was alive with movement. Shadowy figures swirled around him, their forms constantly shifting, faces morphing into those he had once known, friends, co-workers, even his own family, all twisted into monstrous, hollow shapes. At the center of the void stood a massive figure. Taller than any nightmare he had faced, its body was an undulating mass of darkness, smoke, and shadows. Its glowing red eyes pierced Alex's mind, making his thoughts feel exposed and vulnerable. He tried to speak, to plead, but no sound came out. The figure moved closer, and every step it took made the void ripple, like reality itself was breaking. "You cannot escape," a voice boomed, both inside his head and all around him. It was everywhere, yet nowhere. "You belong to the darkness now." Alex felt himself trembling uncontrollably. He tried to fight, to run, to wake up, but it was useless. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around him like icy chains, lifting him off the ground. The world twisted violently. Faces he thought were safe smiled with cruelty, their mouths stretching impossibly wide. The air burned his lungs, and the cold gnawed at his bones. In desperation, he reached into his mind for a memory of light, of warmth, anything human. He pictured his childhood dog, the laughter of friends, his mother's smile. The image faltered at first, weak against the suffocating darkness, but then it grew, shining like a beacon. The shadows recoiled slightly, shrieking with rage. "You think you can fight me?" the voice hissed. "You are nothing." Alex focused harder, letting the memory fill him completely. His body pulsed with light from within, a bright, white glow cutting through the endless black void. The massive figure roared, its shape flickering, unstable. The smaller shadows began to scatter, screaming in incomprehensible voices as they dissolved into nothingness. And then, with one final surge, the darkness collapsed. Alex woke up in his bedroom, gasping, drenched in sweat. Sunlight streamed through the window for the first time in days, soft and reassuring. His body ached, but the shadows were gone. The mirrors reflected only him, alone, and the apartment was quiet. He sat on the edge of his bed, trembling, exhausted, but alive. The nightmares had come, terrifying and vivid, but somehow he had survived. For the first time in days, he felt hope. He knew the darkness might return someday, nightmares were patient, but for now, he was free. As he looked around, Alex realized something important: the nightmares were real, but so was the light within him. And sometimes, the only way to survive the horrors that feel real is to hold on to the part of yourself that refuses to be consumed.